My name is Lena Whitaker, and I'm 30 years old now. But the night my life really started, I was 18, standing in my father's kitchen with a birthday candle melting down the side of a grocery store cupcake. My father didn't shout. He didn't throw anything. He just slid a $50 bill across the counter like he was paying a parking ticket and said, "Take it and get out. I'm done raising someone else's mistake." My grandmother was sitting in the living room. My younger brother was halfway down the stairs. Nobody moved. That was the moment I learned something important about families. Sometimes the loudest betrayal isn't yelling, it's silence. I picked up the bill, folded it once, blew out the candle, and walked out of the house with one duffel bag and a promise to myself that one day he would have to look me in the eye and hear the truth he'd spent years running from. But to understand why that moment mattered so much, you have to go back long before my 18th birthday, back to when my mom was still alive. My mother, Caroline, had this quiet strength about her. The kind of person who didn't argue loudly, but somehow kept the peace in a room just by standing there. When my dad's temper started creeping up the walls, she'd step in without anyone noticing. She'd change the subject, put a hand on my shoulder, and somehow the storm would pass. When I was 10 years old, she got sick. Ovarian cancer. The doctors said 6 months. She fought for 15. 15 months of hospital visits and whispered conversations in hallways. 15 months of pretending everything would be fine, because that's what kids need to believe. The night she died, the house went quiet in a way that never really went away. At first, my dad tried to act normal. Then the small changes started. Pictures of my mom disappeared from the walls. Family dinners got shorter. Conversations got colder. And somewhere in that quiet, a story began growing. The story my father told everyone was simple. He said my mother had cheated. He said he only raised me because he felt obligated, and because she was gone, nobody could contradict him. I heard the rumor for the first time when I was 13. A girl at school leaned across the lunch table and asked me if it was true that my real dad lived somewhere else. I didn't even know what she meant, but the look on her face told me enough. From then on, everything made more sense. Why my brother got new clothes every fall. Why I wore thrift store jackets. Why my room was the one above the garage where the heater barely worked. The worst part wasn't the treatment. It was the doubt. Because when you hear something often enough, even about yourself, you start wondering if it might be true. The only person who never treated me differently was my Uncle Mike. He was my mom's younger brother, a mechanic who smelled like motor oil and peppermint gum. The kind of guy who didn't talk much but showed up every time something broke. When my dad kicked me out that night, Uncle Mike didn't ask a lot of questions. He just loaded my bag into his truck and said, "You hungry?" That was the first night I slept in the small apartment above his garage. It wasn't fancy. The couch sagged in the middle, the fridge rattled when it ran, but it was the first place that felt safe in years. I got a job waiting tables, finished high school, and somehow, despite everything, I got accepted into a nursing program 2 hours away. Uncle Mike drove me to campus in that same rusty pickup. Halfway there, he said something I'll never forget. "Kid, the world's gonna try real hard to tell you what you're worth. Don't let it." I carried those words through every exam, every overnight shift, every moment I felt like giving up. But the envelope stayed with me the whole time. A sealed white envelope with 2 documents inside. One was a DNA test I took when I was 22. The other was a handwritten letter from my grandmother. I never showed it to my father. Not once. Because I was waiting for the moment when he'd say the lie out loud in front of enough people that the truth couldn't be ignored. That moment finally came 11 years later, my father's 60th birthday party. He threw it in the backyard of the same house he'd kicked me out of. 80 guests, neighbors, co-workers, half the extended family. I almost didn't go, but my brother called me a week before. His voice sounded tired in a way I'd never heard before. "Please come," he said. "I think it's time." So I went. I walked into that yard like someone stepping back into a memory they'd spent years trying to forget. The porch looked smaller, the fence was newly painted, but the air felt the same, tight, like the place remembered what had happened there. My dad spotted me almost immediately. His smile disappeared like someone flipped a switch. But he didn't say anything. Not yet. For the first hour he ignored me, shook hands, told stories, played the role everyone expected. Then someone clinked a glass and called for a toast. My father stepped up with a beer in his hand and started talking about family, about loyalty, about blood. And then he said the sentence he'd been practicing for 30 years. "I raised a lot of kids in this house, but only one of them was actually mine." The crowd laughed awkwardly. My brother looked at the ground, and every pair of eyes slowly turned toward me. That was the moment I stood up. I didn't yell, I didn't rush, I just walked to the center of the yard with that envelope in my hand. "Before everyone believes that story," I said, "I think we should look at something." The backyard went silent. I opened the envelope, pulled out the DNA report, and read one line. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. My father's face turned gray, but I wasn't finished. Then I unfolded my grandmother's letter. Her handwriting shook across the page like every word had cost her something. In it, she admitted something she'd kept secret for decades. She had caught my father with another woman while my mother was pregnant. My mother never cheated. He did. And he spent 30 years blaming the wrong person. By the time I finished reading, nobody in that yard was looking at me anymore. They were all looking at him. My father tried to speak, tried to deny it, but the words wouldn't come. And for the first time in my life, he looked small. I placed the papers on the table beside his birthday cake, and then I said the only thing left to say. "DNA says you're my father," I told him, "but the man who actually raised me is waiting in the truck outside." Uncle Mike was parked at the curb the whole time, engine off, arms crossed, exactly where he'd been the night he picked me up 11 years earlier. I walked out of that backyard without looking back. The party ended 10 minutes later. People left quietly. The truth has a way of emptying a room. I never spoke to my father again. But something strange happened after that night. My brother started calling. My cousins reached out. Old neighbors showed up with apologies they should have given years ago. And life, slowly, got lighter. Not perfect, just honest. A year later, I bought my first little house. Nothing fancy, but when I hung the keys on the wall, it felt like closing a chapter I'd been stuck inside since childhood. I still keep that $50 bill, framed above my kitchen table. Not because I'm bitter, because it reminds me how wrong someone can be about your worth. My name is Lena Whitaker, And the man who raised me wasn't the one who shared my DNA. He was the one who showed up every single day when he didn't have to. And sometimes that's the only definition of family that actually matters.